When Anna was preparing to divorce me for her first love, she got into a car accident and fell into a coma. But her soul remained trapped by my side, and I pretended not to see her. The doctors said she might never wake up. Her first love, Henry, distanced himself the moment he heard the news, quickly announcing a new relationship with someone else. Later, when Anna woke up, he reappeared, his voice soft and affectionate as he said to her calm gaze, "Anna, you're finally awake. I've been waiting for you." I looked at Anna in the ICU, her body hooked up to various tubes. Unconscious. A cold, bitter sense of schadenfreude arose in my chest. Look at this is the kind of karma someone gets for betraying real love. The doctors said her brain injury was severe, and the chances of her waking up were less than 5%. When Henry heard the news, he came to the hospital, gave Anna a brief, dismissive glance, and coldly said, "Hope you recover soon." He never came back after that. He probably forgot that Anna had gotten into that accident for him. 6 months ago, the day before Anna was about to divorce me, she had received a call from Henry saying he was too drunk at a party to make it home. Despite the stormy weather, Anna didn't hesitate to drive out to pick him up, only to end up in a horrific multi-car pileup. When I got the call and rushed to the hospital, I was met with one thin, cold notice after another, the grim prognosis of her condition. No one could understand what I was feeling at that moment. On one hand, I darkly wished she would just die already, but on the other, I cruelly thought that dying this way would be too kind for her. I didn't know what I wanted as the outcome. I just wanted her to feel all the pain I'd been through. I wanted her to experience every ounce of suffering I had endured. But now, she lay unconscious in the hospital, a vegetable. And the man she loved most, Henry, no longer wanted her. In fact, I once ran into Henry at a restaurant and had reminded him, the doctor said that if the people who matter to her spend time with her and talk to her, she might have a better chance of waking up. He smiled dismissively. Why should that matter to me? I'm not going to waste my time on a vegetable who has nothing to do with me. You're her husband, George Miller. You're the one who should be there for her. Nothing to do with you. He didn't say that when he made Anna leave me, a fever-ridden wreck at home, to celebrate his birthday with him. He didn't say that when he urged Anna to divorce me to be with him. But now, when Anna had become a vegetable because of him, needing care and companionship, he had the nerve to say nothing to do with me. I looked at him calmly. Henry, don't forget, she became like this because she went to pick you up from a party when you were too drunk to get home. He immediately became furious, shouting, did I hold a gun to her head to make her come pick me up? She was the one who insisted on coming to save me. It's her fault she got into a car accident and became this way. Don't try to blame me. I didn't respond. I just silently watched his hurried, almost desperate retreat, as if he was running from bad luck. Of course. He wouldn't want to wait for a vegetable who might never wake up. I turned my head slightly, letting my gaze unconsciously drift toward the soul that had been following me for so long. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, her brows tightly furrowed. She must be feeling terrible right now. Anna didn't know I could see her. It was the second week after the car accident when I accidentally fell asleep while working in my study. The night breeze blew in through the open window, waking me up. In my blurry vision, I saw Anna, her expression mournful, leaning against the wooden bookshelf filled with books. The white sheer curtains would occasionally drift past her, gently brushing her. The drowsiness vanished instantly. I even forgot to react. I remained in the half-conscious position, leaning on the desk, for what felt like an eternity before I picked up the phone and called the hospital. The message I received was, Ms. Anna is stable today. Her condition hasn't worsened, but there are no signs of her waking up yet. After calmly hanging up, I blinked and realized that her entire body was faintly translucent. I stood up, stepping lightly on the soft carpet, and slowly walked toward her. Pretending I saw nothing, I reached through her body to pull down the venture capitalist's handbook from the second shelf. In the few steps it took to return to my chair, my emotions went through a roller coaster ride from terror to astonishment, then to calmness. Anna's soul had detached from her body, trapped near me. And not only that, I could hear her speak. Because when I picked up the divorce agreement she had had the lawyer draft, I heard her sneer, George Miller, you must be so happy now, right? I'm in a coma. Can't divorce you anymore. It's just as you wanted. She said it was what I wanted. She thought I had been unwilling, clinging to her, not letting go until she agreed to divorce. But the truth was, I was really ready to give her up. Am I happy? No, I'm not happy. And I want her to be unhappy too. So I made sure she could hear how Henry had distanced himself from her. I heard the light sound of the nurse's footsteps at the end of the hall. Silently, I walked into the ICU and approached her side. I have to admit, even though she was only wearing a hospital gown, her hair messy and disheveled, her face pale and sickly as she lay in bed, Anna was still incredibly beautiful. Her long, curled lashes cast shadows on her eyelids. Under her delicate nose were full, perfectly shaped lips. Her face, which was originally a standard oval shape, had thinned a little from the coma, but she still exuded both innocence and sensuality. But I liked Anna, and I was with her, not because of her face. After all, I knew that the more beautiful something is, the more dangerous it can be. That's why, when we first met at the same wedding, I immediately classified her as a dangerous object. We were both bridesmaid and best man. Aside from handing her a napkin when she spilled a drink, I didn't have much interaction with her. But fate has a way of sneaking in when you least expect it. Soon, we met again. I had been jogging in the park one evening when I accidentally saved an elderly woman who had collapsed, Anna's grandmother. From there, as a thank you, Anna invited me to dinner, and our encounters began to happen more frequently. We'd be trapped in the same office building during a rainstorm, and she'd happen to pass by and offer me a ride home. One holiday, a friend dragged me to an event, and it turned out to be Anna's birthday party. Facing the candles she lit, she made a wish for love to go smoothly. With so many coincidences, I started to sense something wasn't right. So I began to avoid her on purpose. But Anna didn't care about my distance. Instead, she kept pressing forward, until there was nowhere left for me to retreat. Only then did I helplessly ask her what she wanted. With a smile in her eyes, her tone sweet and soft, she asked, "George Miller, I'm chasing you. Can't you feel it?" I don't know why Anna liked me. But after that, she stopped being cautious and directly launched a full-on attack. I resisted her approach, trying hard to guard my heart. But at that time, Anna was beautiful, mature, funny, and tender in that way that makes you feel like you're the only one in her world. To be honest, for someone like me who had never been in a relationship before, it was almost impossible to remain indifferent. Falling for her was just a matter of time. The moment I agreed to be with her came on Valentine's Day. I had drunk a lot of wine at the dinner table in order to close a deal. As I was about to leave, I accidentally ran into a family having dinner next door, my father, Pete Miller, and his mistress Becky, along with their illegitimate son, Ryan. At first, I didn't care and was going to pretend I didn't see them. But Ryan, that illegitimate son, had to call out loudly, "George, you're not even going to say hi to Dad?" Then Becky chimed in, "Yeah, George, your dad really misses you. Come sit down and have a meal with us." I stopped in my tracks, turned back, and sneered at the three of them, who were responsible for my mother's death. "Really? You can still eat? Aren't you afraid my mom will come back and haunt you tonight?" Maybe my words hit a nerve because Ryan suddenly stood up, pointing at me, "You ungrateful son, shut up, I don't have a father like you." Before I could finish, the woman beside him threw a glass of wine in my face. In the next second, someone appeared behind me and threw a glass of wine back at her. It was Anna. She stood in front of me, coldly smirking, and said, "Enjoy your meal, murderers." Then she grabbed my hand and led me out of the restaurant. Under the flickering streetlights, Anna carefully wiped the wine off my face with a napkin, not mentioning the unpleasant incident that had just occurred. To be honest, it was the first time in so many years that someone had stood in front of me in a protective way. Couples walked by on the street, and I'm not sure how much time passed. But the silence was broken when Anna casually asked, as if she was asking if I wanted to grab a bite, "George, want to spend Valentine's Day together?" Even to this day, I still remember the tremor deep inside me, like a seed sprouting in my heart. I looked into her serious eyes and made my decision. She was the one. With a smile in my eyes, I looked at her and said, "Sure." She paused for a second, then suddenly smiled. She reached into her bag, took out some chocolates, unwrapped one, and put it in my mouth. Watching me expectantly, I made it myself. "Is it sweet?" I smiled. "Very sweet. It will always be this sweet," she said. Back then, I was so naive, thinking that forever was just that, forever. It wasn't until Henry came back from overseas that I realized that the forever had a deadline, one that ended before he came back into the picture. Once Henry showed up, all the promises and vows turned into jokes. It's a cliché story. Henry was Anna's first love, the one she could never have. After he chose to be with someone else and went abroad, Anna couldn't forget him. And I was just a passing chapter in her life. Anna had only one family member, her grandmother, Mrs. Smith. The reason she collapsed was due to stomach cancer. The one thing she couldn't rest easy about was Anna, and her greatest wish was to see her granddaughter get married. I was just the pawn Anna chose to use to give her grandmother peace of mind. But Anna's grandmother, Mrs. Smith, truly liked me, and treated me very well. The love I felt from Anna was a facade, but the affection Mrs. Smith gave me was real. She would make me my favorite desserts, prepare clothes for all 4 seasons, and side with me when Anna and I had conflicts. She would sternly ask Anna, "What could George have done wrong? He was only doing it for you." Even before she passed away, she told me, "Marrying Anna is a hardship for you, George. As long as you two are happy, you'll be at ease." At that time, Anna, eyes red, tightly held my hand and promised, "We will, I promise." Then, 8 months after Mrs. Smith passed away, Anna reunited with Henry at a gathering. I first realized something was wrong due to a small detail. That evening, while we were having dinner, I mentioned the sudden heavy rain earlier in the day, followed by the appearance of a double rainbow in the sky. Social media was full of photos, and it was said that the double rainbow signified something good was about to happen. I asked if she had seen it. She didn't answer, as she seemed to drift off. A few seconds later, she realized I had stopped eating and was quietly staring at her. She smiled gently and asked, "George, what did you just say?" I said it was nothing important. Back in school, whenever I faced a multiple-choice question I didn't know, I could rely on my intuition to guess the right answer. I never imagined that one day, this skill I was proud of would be used on Anna. Without even meaning to, I started to suspect that the reason Anna had zoned out those few seconds was because of a man. I was right. It was Henry. He was Anna's first love, 3 years older than her. At the time, Anna wasn't as mature or beautiful as she was later on, just an ordinary college student. She couldn't compare to Emma, who was also in love with Henry and came from a wealthy family. So, it was no surprise that Anna lost out. But I guess she never expected that one day Henry would break up and return to his home country, while she had already blossomed into the woman she had become. Everything seemed to fall into place, and the past separation was merely a prelude to them meeting again at the perfect time. I don't know how deeply Anna loved Henry, but I do know that he managed to pull her away from me time and again, without a care that she was already married. With just one light comment from him, wanting to be with Anna, he managed to destroy my marriage. Destroy me. From the beginning, I had doubts, then I questioned her, and finally, I pleaded and broke down. But Anna pushed me away with disgust. "George, you're really disgusting right now." That night, I stood on the balcony for hours, tears soaking the cigarette butts one after another, until I realized one thing. Anna was right. I was disgusted with myself too. So, I gave up. When Anna once again brought up divorce, I asked her, "In these 4 years, was there ever a moment when you were sincere?" She impatiently avoided my gaze and said no. I lowered my head in silence for a few seconds and then calmly agreed to the divorce. She seemed surprised, suspiciously eyeing me and asking, "What's the trick this time?" Yes, in the past, I had always made excuses, sudden illness, a broken-down car to keep delaying the divorce. But this time, when I truly wanted to divorce her, she was in a car accident because of Henry and fell into a coma. Then I found out. Henry didn't hesitate to abandon her and immediately reunited with his ex. I heard that the reason Henry broke up and went back to his home country was because his girlfriend, Emma, had an ambiguous relationship with his first love. After multiple arguments over this, they eventually broke up. But as the saying goes, you always long for what you can't have, and regret what you've lost. So when Henry returned and got back in touch with Anna, showing up at the same events and getting closer and closer to her, Emma also came back to find him. It's hard to say if, during his time with Anna, Henry intentionally tried to provoke the rich and beautiful Emma. After all, Anna had once been her rival. And during the period when Anna was about to divorce me for Henry, it was also when Emma, desperate to win him back, did many romantic and extreme things, apologizing with a drone, sending a ring through a sea of flowers, even self-harming after drinking. Henry quietly watched, stayed with Anna, and then, not long after she fell into a coma from the car accident, when Emma once again spent a fortune to apologize and confess her love, Henry agreed to get back together with her. No one really knew what role Anna played between them, but Emma did visit Anna at the hospital once, and, in a tone of strange relief, said, "Although it might not be right to think this way, I'm actually thankful for that car accident. Anna, this time, I won." At that moment, Anna was standing behind her, her face dark with fury, but because she was in her ghostly state, she couldn't do anything. From hearing Henry deny any responsibility, to witnessing him get back with Emma, Anna was first in disbelief, then full of rage, and finally, she had no choice but to accept everything. I watched her pain quietly and with a sense of pleasure, observing how she quietly followed me around. It was almost mocking. She once wanted to sever ties with me, didn't want to see me again, but now, she was forced to be with me every single day. Just like when we first started dating, we would share every little thing we did, keeping each other updated on our whereabouts. Now, she had to follow me to work, to meetings, to shopping, and even plan vacations with me. Over time, I started to hear her frustrated and resentful voice. "I'm in a coma, and you still have the nerve to go travel, do you even care about me? Don't you care whether I live or die, George, have you forgotten you're married? Stay away from that woman." The woman she was talking about was one of my interns, Susie. Among all the interns I supervised, she was the only one who didn't address me as Mr. George like the others, but simply called me George. She was also the most capable among them. I didn't really care about how they addressed me, and since Susie's voice was clear and sweet, calling me George didn't feel disrespectful at all. But Anna didn't see it that way. Every time Susie appeared around me, she would show a side of herself I had never seen before. She would shout, frustrated and furious, "George, are you blind? Can't you see her intentions aren't pure?" Hearing this, I would glance at Susie, who was sitting quietly, polite and neat, working calmly by my side. I couldn't help but wonder, "Anna, why are you so upset?" Of course, I'm no longer a naive kid. And am not blind, I can clearly see what Susie thinks. She likes me. Susie's looks are exactly the type that boys tend to like these days, and her personality is a perfect balance of being sweet when the moment calls for it, and calm and collected when things need to be done. Since I've known her, I've rarely seen her lose control of her emotions. Even when a colleague accidentally deleted a plan she'd worked hard on, she would calmly finish her breakfast, then choose the quickest way to restore the data or redo the whole thing. After fixing it, she would reassure the colleague, who was full of apologies, saying, "It's fine, just be more careful next time." The only time I saw her flustered was once when we went together for a business meeting. Afterward, she went to drive, and I stayed behind in the lounge to rest from a headache caused by alcohol. I was on my way to find her when I ran into a drunk man. He bumped into me, but then started picking a fight, demanding an apology. Honestly, if this had happened right after I graduated, I would have been scared and unsure of what to do. Probably apologizing cautiously. But I wasn't that person anymore. I ignored him and turned to leave. When he angrily tried to smash a bottle at me, I grabbed his wrist and restrained him. The bottle hit the ground with a loud bang and shattered into pieces. When Susie found me, her dress, which was always immaculate, was now lightly covered in dust, but she hadn't noticed. She just stared at my bleeding hand, her breath ragged, apologizing, "I'm sorry I'm late." I smiled slightly and replied, "It's fine, just in time." Later, she bought me medicine and bandaged my hand. On the way home, as I looked out the window, I casually said, "Susie, I'm married." She didn't seem surprised at all. She just kept her eyes on the road and replied, "Yeah, I know. But I heard you're getting a divorce." This conversation was the only time we'd discussed personal matters since we'd met. It was all factual, nothing out of place. So, Anna's anger puzzled me. I hadn't done anything wrong, and she didn't even love me. Why was she angry? But that didn't matter. Her emotions, or her as a person, would no longer affect me. I continued to maintain a professional relationship with Susie. Until today, when we were checking the venue for an event, and the scaffolding collapsed. Susie reacted quickly, pushing me out of the way and taking the brunt of the impact. I was fine, just a slight scratch on my arm. But Susie had injuries on her side and calf from the fall. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, my heart in my throat as I waited for her results. When I heard the doctor say she was fine and only needed to rest at home, I got a call from Anna's attending physician. That's when I realized that, when Susie and I had fallen, Anna had been frantically calling my name, following behind me. But now, she was gone. At the same moment, the doctor's voice came through the phone. When we checked on Ms. Anna earlier, we found signs of improvement. There's a chance she may wake up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, before heading to the ICU. Standing in front of Anna, who still lay unconscious, I couldn't help but smirk sarcastically. Even with less than a 5% chance, she might wake up. I don't know if Anna will ever wake up, but half a month after I left the hospital, I heard something else. Henry broke up again. A long time ago, I came across a saying, cheating is either 0 times or countless times. So, it didn't surprise me that his girlfriend, after getting back together with him, ended up getting involved with some unknown online celebrity and was once again planning to break up with him. What really surprised me, though, was that Henry, who had once carried himself with such grace and aloofness, had changed. In a large shopping mall, he was shouting and cursing, completely disregarding his image and begging on his knees. I watched from a distance, and it felt all too familiar. It was me, a long time ago. The version of me who clung to Anna and wouldn't let go. I had been just like him, like a madman, a wreck. I still remember the day vividly. It was my birthday, and I happened to run into Anna, who had said she was going on a business trip, sitting at a table with Henry, chatting merrily. In that moment it was as if a bucket of ice-cold water had been dumped on me, yet my heart was on fire. Painfully burning. I rushed over, knocking everything off their table without thinking. Anna immediately stood up, furious, and shouted at me, "George, are you crazy?" Henry smiled gracefully and looked at Anna. "How did you end up marrying a man like this, Anna?" My reason was completely shattered, and I raised my hand, striking him. "Otherwise, should have married you, the man who destroys families." Then, without hesitation, Anna slapped me across the face. The taste of blood flooded my mouth. That evening, she was the first to bring it up. "George, let's get a divorce." I had truly loved Anna, and even though my rational mind told me to let go, emotionally I just couldn't. I couldn't bear it, and I didn't want them to be happy, so I ended up hurting myself in the process. And now, Henry had tasted the same pain I once felt. As for the reason why he walked away so easily after his last breakup, but this time chose the complete opposite, I couldn't help but wonder if it was because his fallback plan. His tool to provoke his girlfriend Anna was now lying unconscious. The farce continued. As I stirred my coffee and was about to look away, I unknowingly caught a glimpse of a faint figure in the corner of the crowd. It was watching Henry lose control. It was Anna. After so many days, her soul had reappeared. But this time, she wasn't trapped by me anymore. She could no longer get close to me either. She stood 3 meters away, the closest she could be. I thought that once she had gained her freedom, she wouldn't follow me anymore. But to my surprise, every morning when I left for work, I would see her standing silently beneath a ginkgo tree by the gate of the community. The moment she saw me, she would instinctively start walking toward me, but then it was as if some invisible force pulled her back to her original spot. Every time she came toward me. Every time she was pulled back. I didn't know if, as a wandering soul, she hoped someone would notice her. But one evening, as I walked out of a dessert shop, I smiled in her direction. After a brief pause, she seemed to move her lips. And I could tell she was mouthing George. Then, holding a box of beautifully wrapped cakes, I walked toward her step by step, watching as she had no choice but to retreat with every step I took. Until I stopped right where she had been. And there, through her, I saw Susie walking toward me. Since the accident, Susie had been recuperating at home. During her recovery, I visited her once with flowers and fruit, covering all her medical expenses and hiring a caregiver. She didn't refuse, and when I asked if she needed anything, she looked me in the eye and said, "My birthday is in a month." Now that she had fully recovered and her birthday had arrived, I brought the cake to keep my promise. As we walked toward the parking lot, Susie and Anna probably guessed where we were headed. From the crowd, I heard her shout at me, "George, you can't go, come back, George. Come back." She screamed. Without hesitation, I got into the car, glancing at Anna through the rearview mirror. Her face was contorted with rage, and for a moment, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. Recalling a small incident from the past. Not long after Anna and I started dating, I changed jobs. One evening, I had to work late and told Anna not to wait for me to eat. After work, my colleagues and I were planning to grab a quick bite, but just as I got into the car, Anna's call came in. Her voice on the phone was calm, tinged with a gentle, helpless smile. "George, I've been waiting for you downstairs for 3 hours. Are you really going to leave me hanging like this?" Shocked, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Anna standing there, holding a bento box. I immediately got out of the car and ran to her, pulling her into my arms and asking, "Why didn't you call me? Why wait here by yourself?" She snuggled against my chest and laughed softly. "Of course, I didn't want to bother my dear George at work," I snapped back to the present. Anna's fading figure in the rearview mirror grew smaller and smaller until it became a tiny dot. I heard Susie ask, "What are you looking at?" I joked, "Just watching a comedy." 15 minutes later. We arrived at the restaurant I had booked. Though it was supposed to be a celebration for her birthday, Susie had ordered food based on my preferences. I quietly shifted my gaze to the cake, opened the box, and a sweet orange fragrance immediately filled the air. After lighting the candles, I picked up the cake and smiled at her. "Happy birthday, Susie. Make a wish." The restaurant's lighting was soft and dim, and through the flickering candlelight, her face was hard to make out clearly. But I knew she was looking at me intently before she closed her eyes to make her wish. "I wish I won't be late again," she said. I couldn't help but laugh, setting the cake down and raising my glass to toast her. "Then I hope your wish comes true." The night went on, and with 3 drinks in me, we strolled along the riverbank, the lights from the city reflecting off the water. I stood there quietly for a moment before sighing and, for the second time, opening up to Susie about my personal life. I was straightforward with her. "Susie. Even though I'm getting a divorce, you know. She's in a coma after the car accident." The evening breeze ruffled her bangs, but she didn't seem to mind the implication of my words. She casually leaned her forearm on the railing by the river, turned her head to look at me, and said bluntly, "Divorce or widowhood, in the end, one of them will happen." Just as her words fell, I noticed Anna's figure in the distance. I wondered if the evening breeze had carried her words to Anna's ears. My peripheral vision caught sight of her standing there, silently watching me. Then, as if mocking herself, she let out a small laugh before slowly fading into the wind. 3 days later, I got the answer. Anna woke up. The first to arrive at the hospital was Henry. In the still and cold hospital room, he was speaking softly to Anna, who was gazing at him calmly, word by word. "I've been waiting for you, Anna. You're finally awake." I had no idea how he knew Anna had woken up, nor was I interested in his heartfelt confession. My gaze passed over Anna's eyes, which had been fixed on me ever since I entered the room. I turned to the doctor standing nearby and asked, "When can she be discharged?" The doctor explained cautiously, "Ms. Anna has just woken up. She'll need to stay in the hospital for further observation and undergo rehabilitation. If there's anything urgent." I smiled politely, cutting him off. "Nothing urgent. Just need to file for a divorce." As soon as I finished speaking, I heard a loud smack. Anna slapped the cup from Henry's hand, her gaze locked on mine, her eyes red, almost frantic. "George, I've just woken up, and you don't even ask how I'm doing, and you're already so eager to divorce me, you see." She was always good at twisting things around, distorting the facts. It was she who had done everything to force me into a divorce, yet now she was blaming me for wanting one. Before I could speak, I heard Henry's soft, confused voice call out, "Anna." The room fell silent. I glanced at the shattered glass cup on the floor, ignored Anna's furious stare, and turned to leave, tossing over my shoulder, "Let me know when you're discharged so I can finalize the divorce." From that moment on, I never returned to the hospital again. However, I did hear that Henry went there every day. What he did, I didn't know and didn't care. But the troublesome part was that every 2 or 3 days, I'd get a call from the hospital updating me on Anna's condition. I wasn't sure if they really needed to report her recovery to the family, but I didn't want to know. So when they called again, I politely refused. "She's an adult. There's no need to report everything to me. Next time, unless she's dead, don't call me again." Just before I hung up, I heard the sound of glass breaking on the floor, followed by Henry's startled exclamation. I didn't see Anna again until 2 months later, in the evening. She had been discharged. Since my car was at the wash, Susie, who had stayed late at work with me, dropped me off downstairs at my apartment. Just as I watched her car drive away, I heard a sharp, angry shout from behind me, "George." The smile on my lips froze, and I turned to look. It was Anna. Her face was pale, and she had lost a lot of weight. The thin jacket she was wearing was billowing in the night wind, and the streetlights cast a long shadow of her figure. I stood still, watching her walk briskly toward me before she coldly demanded, "Where have you been so late?" I couldn't be bothered to respond. Frowning, I turned my body slightly and said, "If it's not about the divorce, I don't see why we need to talk." She stopped me after just 2 steps, her gaze sharp, teeth clenched as she said each word through gritted teeth, "George, don't forget, we're not divorced yet." I instantly understood what she meant, and found it incredibly ironic. Unable to hold back, I let out a light chuckle, lowered my head, and gently asked her, "Anna, that marriage certificate, it didn't keep you in line before, do you think it can hold me back now?" A month after Anna was discharged, Henry came to find me. Since Anna had woken up from her coma, her attitude towards Henry had undergone a complete 180-degree turn. It was so obvious that even the nurses in the hospital could sense her coldness towards him. After being discharged, Anna used the poor excuse of needing to handle work to avoid meeting with him, and instead appeared daily outside my office building and the gate of my neighborhood. It was clear she no longer wanted a divorce. So, when Henry confronted me, the first thing he said was, "George, you're doing this on purpose, aren't you? You're deliberately keeping things ambiguous with a woman, just to provoke Anna and make her try to win you back," he added. I had just stepped out of a restaurant, and his words made me laugh. Holding my coffee in one hand, I casually slipped my other hand into my pocket, lowered my head, and replied calmly, "Yes. That's exactly what I'm doing." George, I wasn't interested in hearing his baseless accusations. I strode past him into the company building, but when I turned around, I saw he was still stubbornly trying to follow me, only to be stopped by the security guard. The guard hesitated and asked, "Mr. George, is he?" I smiled and said, "Just a stranger." After that, I didn't see Henry again, but I heard that after Anna repeatedly ignored him, Henry finally lost his patience. Coldly, he told her, "Anna, you'd better not regret this. I won't give you another chance." Soon after, he started a relationship with the daughter of a CEO from their company, who had always been quite fond of him. Clearly, Henry's harsh words didn't have any effect on Anna. She still persistently showed up with various excuses to meet me, insisting, "George, I'm not going to divorce you." I found it both ironic and laughable. When she had forced me into a divorce, she probably never imagined a day would come when our roles would reverse. The person saying "I'm not going to divorce you" would be her. I even heard her, in a rare moment of softness, say to me, "George, let's start over, okay?" She wanted a fresh start. She wanted me to pretend that Henry never existed, that she never hurt me, and to start again with her, loving her like I did before. I felt helpless, more confused than anything. In the end, I simply gave her one sentence in return: "How could I ever marry someone like you, Anna?" That sentence seemed to hit a sore spot, and she immediately lost her temper. "So, who do you want to marry?" That in turn, Susie, after a beat, she demanded, "George, stop being unreasonable." Yes, she wanted a divorce to pursue true love, while I wanted a divorce because I was making a fuss. The truth was, ever since I'd completely given up on her, I hadn't been angry in a long time. My career was going smoothly, my friends were around, and life was peaceful. There didn't seem to be anything worth getting upset about. But in that moment, my emotions flared up again. Words were no longer enough to release my frustration, so I raised my hand and slapped her across the face without hesitation. The sound of the slap echoed, and a heavy silence followed. Anna's face turned to the side, and she kept her head tilted for a long moment before she let out a light laugh. "I've paid you back for that slap. Are you satisfied now?" she said. "I know you let her get close to you just to get back at me. George, you've gotten what you wanted." I won't deny it, I was indeed a little taken with Susie. The reason was simple. Once, I had been struggling for a long time over a difficult project. One evening, I sat alone on a bench in the square, lost in thought. Around me, people were laughing and playing, colorful balloons and bubbles floated in the air. But none of it mattered to me. Then, in the midst of this scene, a person dressed as a teddy bear walked through the crowd holding a balloon and came over to tie it to my wrist. Then, she began to dance for me. To be honest, she wasn't dancing very well, but I couldn't help but laugh. I leaned back slightly and, teasing her, said, dancing in a teddy bear costume, "Susie, you're something else." She took a few steps closer, removed her headpiece, and revealed a flushed face. Her hairline was damp with sweat, but her eyes were clear and bright, staring intently at me. She said, "What I wear doesn't matter. How I dance doesn't matter. What matters is that, George, you smiled." Yes, I smiled. That's how simple it was. She made me happy. After a moment of looking her over carefully, I asked, "The teddy bear who appeared before me last time, was it you too?" It was on the night when Anna and I had our first argument because of Henry. I was sitting alone in a coffee shop by the glass wall, feeling down, when a teddy bear came over and performed a magic trick for me through the glass. At that time, Susie hadn't yet come to the company. And I didn't know who was behind the costume. I only remembered that after I silently mouthed a thank you to her, she quietly watched me for a few seconds before slowly turning and walking away into the crowd. Not long after, I heard the self-introduction of a new intern at the company. "Hello, I'm Susie." This time, unlike before, Susie was standing before me without the headpiece. After a moment of looking at me, she softly asked, "Do you remember me?" I tugged at the balloon tied to my wrist, blinking, and said, "Of course, I remember you." Compared to the intense, burning emotions Anna brought me, Susie's feelings were like a refreshing, clean glass of lemonade, not overly exciting, but not overwhelming either. It was calm and warm, the kind of feeling that wouldn't make me lose myself. And after a failed relationship, I wasn't about to become cold and heartless. That would make Anna's 4 years in my life far too significant, given how long my life would be. So, I didn't resist the feelings I had for Susie. After all, love itself isn't wrong. It's the person who gets it wrong. And Anna was simply a mistake I encountered on my life's journey. Once I let go, it was over. Everything that happened after her had nothing to do with her. I wouldn't use a real and genuine feeling to get revenge on her. So, when Anna asked me that question with such confidence, I just shook my head lightly, a sneer forming on my lips as I looked at her. "You think too highly of yourself, Anna." The moment I said that, her face turned a shade paler, and she opened her mouth. Her voice was trembling, hoarse. "George. I know it was all my fault before. I was too obsessed and hurt you. But I've realized my mistake now. I understand that the one I truly love is you. So I won't divorce you." Seeing her obsession, I didn't care. I smiled faintly, unbothered, and said, "If that's the case, then Anna, you can try what it feels like when the person you love, day and night, thinks about another woman." The knife she had driven into my back had ultimately pierced her own heart. Anna said that the person she truly loved was me. Honestly, when I heard those words, my heart didn't stir in the slightest. If anything, I almost wanted to laugh. If I had to endure being hurt so deeply just to make her realize who she truly loved, then that love was nothing but an insult to me. What's more, this realization came only after Henry had deceived her and left her, causing her to regret her decisions. After that, Anna continued to cling to me for a long time. I didn't deliberately avoid her, nor did I angrily tell her to leave. Whether it was late at night outside the company or in the rain at the entrance to the neighborhood, she stood where she wished and waited as long as she wanted. After all, aside from pestering me endlessly, there was nothing else she could do to insert herself into my life. Even though we were still technically married. When she approached me once again and asked, "George, the truth is, you didn't really love me, did you?" I didn't know what kind of emotions she had when she asked this. I looked down at her and studied her face carefully before replying, "Anna, do you remember that summer, in our 2nd year of marriage, that summer evening, with the constant hum of cicadas? We were at an outdoor restaurant having a barbecue when we were confronted by a group of drunk troublemakers. In the chaos, I took a half-broken bottle to protect Anna. My thin shirt tore immediately, and blood began to pour from the wound on my side, staining Anna's white dress. When I woke up in the hospital room, I saw Anna, disheveled and sitting by my bed. Her eyes were red, and she was holding my hand, her voice a hushed whisper, "George, please don't do this, I can't bear to see you hurt." I smiled weakly at her, "Don't worry. It doesn't hurt that much." It didn't hurt much. Especially compared to the pain she later caused me. The memories lingered in silence. Neither of us spoke, but I could hear her shallow breathing. Finally, I sighed in resignation, "Anna, 4 years ago, no one could rival you in my heart." After a long pause, she spoke in a hoarse, dry voice, "Then what about now? Now, am I no longer even close to her in your heart?" I looked at her seriously and shook my head, "No, Anna. You're no longer in my heart." It seemed that she had finally reached the end of the road. She gave a bitter smile and tried to play the family card, "But George, you promised Mrs. Smith that you'd stay with me." I sat there, too tired to respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of a letter Mrs. Smith had written to me. The letter's message was clear: if Anna did anything excessive, you shouldn't hesitate to leave her, without looking back. I once thought this letter would never be needed, but it had come in handy twice. The first time, I didn't listen, and the entanglement dragged on for a long while. The second time was now. By the time I realized it, it had started to rain outside. The gloomy twilight hung low. And Anna's eyes were red. She didn't say another word, turned, and left. Her steps were hurried, her back turned in a pitiful retreat. A long time ago, I had imagined that when Anna finally forced me into a divorce, I would be full of pain and hatred, staring at her glamorous self and saying, "Anna, I will never forgive you for the rest of my life." But when that day finally arrived, my emotions were surprisingly calm. When they met in court, Anna looked even more haggard. I heard she had caught a high fever after being caught in a heavy rain that day. and had to be rushed to the hospital by ambulance. That car accident had obviously taken a great toll on her health. A friend couldn't help but laugh when they told me over the phone, "Looks like the aftermath of the car accident is catching up with her. Who knows how long she'll last. She deserves it, cheating and betraying someone's love during the marriage." I hired the best divorce lawyer and submitted all the evidence of Anna's infidelity, so when the property was divided, I didn't give up a single cent of the benefits that should have belonged to me. Throughout the entire process, Anna remained silent, until just before we parted ways. She suddenly spoke, as if asking me, or perhaps to herself, if Henry hadn't come back, would we have been able to grow old together? If Henry hadn't come back, perhaps her betrayal of me would never have been exposed. But she would have continued to yearn for her first love, the one she couldn't have. The longer time passed, the more idealized that first love would become in her mind. Eventually, she would start to remember Henry whenever a small issue arose between us. And I, quietly compared to him, would become the person she resented. I looked up at the cloudless sky and smiled faintly. "Anna, I never should have gotten caught in this three-person spiral. It was you, for your own selfish reasons, who dragged me into it." After the divorce, my life didn't change much. I went to work as usual, socialized, and occasionally took a few days off for a trip after finishing a project. Except for one thing, Susie and I officially became a couple. It was 3 months after the divorce. At a friend's birthday party, I stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. A business partner from a project came over, offering me a drink, politely and elegantly asking, "I found the original CD of that old movie we talked about during our collaboration. Would you be interested, Mr. George?" We were both adults, so the underlying meaning was clear. I smiled faintly, about to speak, when I suddenly heard a crisp voice behind him, "Sorry, I'm first in line." It was Susie. She was dressed in a stunning fishtail dress, her long black hair cascading down her back. She stood there, gazing at me with a calm yet radiant expression. The night air carried an unfamiliar floral fragrance. I broke the silence first, casting a subtle glance at the drink in my business partner's hand. Without hesitation, I spoke directly, "Sorry, I prefer lemonade." I kept my refusal brief, and soon, the balcony was left with just Susie and me. We stood there quietly for a moment, and then I lowered my head slightly, smiling leisurely as I asked, "So, Susie, what movie should we watch?" She looked up at me, her eyes bright and serious, her tone filled with determination. "Let's watch Titanic." My relationship with Susie wasn't filled with grand, dramatic moments, but when I think back, every interaction felt warm and beautiful. The warm milk she brought me in the mornings, the hangover soup she made when I was drunk, the shirts she ironed, the ties she picked out, and the little pork ribs she always prepared for dinner. Sometimes, as I watched her seriously blow-dry my hair in the mirror, I couldn't help but remember the first time I noticed her feelings for me. It was probably in the same elevator, where I stood, and she was behind me. Through the mirror, I saw her gaze lingering on me. A gaze that wasn't entirely innocent. Susie had a mature emotional age, independent and capable, and in our relationship, her efforts were so visible, far more than mine. It felt like I had nothing to give her, except my companionship. Occasionally, I would ask her if she ever felt it was unfair. She shook her head calmly, holding me tightly as she sighed, her voice carrying an unspoken grievance. "I just feel like you could leave at any time." To be honest, I had been betrayed in love before, so even though I had feelings for her, I kept a part of myself back, unwilling to give her my entire heart. After a brief silence, I could only say, "I'm sorry for not letting you feel 100 loved." When she heard that, she smiled, as if understanding something, her tone serious. "Then I'll love you a little more, to make our love whole." I didn't know how far Susie and I would go, but when we were together, she made me feel at ease and happy, and so I chose to live every day fully. If things worked, they worked. If not, we'd part ways. The most important thing was comfort. This was the lesson I learned from my failed relationship with Anna. The next time I saw Anna was 2 years after our divorce. At a gathering with friends returning home, I was blocked in the hallway on my way back from the bathroom by a crowd. People were gathered, trying to catch a glimpse of something, blocking the passage. I moved away from the crowd, hoping to see what was going on, only to spot Anna at the other end of the crowd, staring at me silently. She quickly looked away. And I lifted my head just in time to see one of the protagonists in the chaos shouting like a madman, and I froze. It was Henry. Sometimes I can't help but marvel at how fate works. It brought the three of us together because of an affair, and now, we were meeting again, in the middle of the same kind of chaos. Henry got married to the CEO's daughter shortly after they started dating. Unfortunately, she cheated on him in the second year of their marriage. I didn't know whether to sympathize with him for being repeatedly betrayed, or to feel satisfaction at his karmic retribution. But I hoped that with every moment of pain he felt, he would remember there was someone who had been tortured by him in the same way. Eventually, the crowd dispersed, and as I passed by Anna, she suddenly called my name. Her voice was hoarse as she said, "I'm sorry." I stopped, trying to read her expression, but it was hard to tell, was it sadness, guilt, or unbearable pain? I wasn't interested in figuring it out. I replied gently, "I won't forgive you. And I hope you don't have a good life." She clearly wasn't doing well. I heard that due to the aftermath of her car accident, she had been seeing doctors for years, but it was all in vain. Her physical and mental health only worsened. When I said that, she stumbled slightly. As Susie called me from a distance and walked toward me, Anna quickly turned away. I couldn't help but think her back seemed hunched, trembling faintly, but there was no sound. Back home, lying in bed, I didn't want to talk because I was exhausted. I was flipping through Susie's phone aimlessly, with no particular purpose. Susie must have thought that seeing Anna had upset me and brought back bad memories, so she came over, held my hand gently, and apologized softly, "I'm sorry I'm late." No one could understand how I felt at that moment. On one hand, I darkly wished she would just die, and on the other, I felt that such an end would be too easy for her. During my junior year, I tutored a high school student. Her parents were divorced, and she lived with her mother, who was always too busy with her career to offer her any emotional support. Except when it came to schoolwork. She needed extra help with English, but she wasn't struggling academically. She purposely did poorly in her studies just to get her mother's attention. In a way, my role wasn't just as her tutor, but more as someone who simply kept her company. The last lesson we had was on her birthday. Not knowing her preferences, I brought her an orange-flavored cake. She didn't eat much, and I assumed she didn't like it. But at the end of the lesson, when we were about to say goodbye, she told me with a serious look, "I really liked it." That student was Susie. Later, I learned that she had secretly taken a photo of me eating the cake. She had hidden her phone in the pages of a textbook to snap the picture. When I saw her again at work, I instantly recognized her. What surprised me even more was that she hadn't just taken the photo back then, she had kept it all these years. A sudden wave of emotion stirred in me. I wasn't sure if the too late she had mentioned meant she hadn't left the room early enough to leave with me, or if it meant she hadn't come to find me before Anna hurt me. But in that moment, it didn't matter. I squeezed her hand in mine and smiled softly. "It's not too late. It's just right." The night air was cool, the moonlight soft, and my love by my side. Everything was just perfect.